Psychotech Live. Woo! Woo! Yeah.
Everyone.
Hmm?
All right, this is an interesting week that we're doing. So we're gonna try to do like a little series, a mini series.
Mhm.
So, where we go through. Do you want to explain it or?
No, go for it.
Psychotech. Where we go through. So last week, Elliot said that there are the three schools of Buddhism, or the three different marks of existence, is what Wikipedia calls them. And those are just like the three different legs of the path. And so you got impermanence. What is it? You got impermanence.
The three big characteristics. So Daniel Ingram's calls them the three characteristics: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and no self. The three schools: Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. And the proposal is that each key characteristic lines up to a key school of Buddhism. And Chögyam Trungpa proposed that the three schools are in fact one journey, which is a big claim, because the schools don't like each other. They sort of reject each other's authority, and it's a whole mess that I don't even understand.
So if you guys thought that the Buddhists were all just peace and love and total acceptance.
Oh yeah, there's some Buddhist villages where they are like forming militias and fighting each other, because if you're in a small village, you sometimes don't like your neighboring village. Like, that's just human way, is to argue. So there is more of a tribal Buddhism, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So is Buddhism the thing that you could just is right and everyone else is wrong? I think that is incorrect.
Well, there is a big problem that there are many Buddhisms, and I've even heard the saying that if Buddhism didn't exist, we would still have to invent something that fits the category of Buddhism for our time and our place. And America's Buddhism is very different to China or like Asia's Buddhism, because the culture is different. Particularly like Western psychology goes ego first, right? You want a strong ego, you want to be healthy ego, right? Eastern Buddhism says there is no self, right? We're sort of going in very different directions here. And so as a consequence, the Buddhism that is needed in America is different to the Buddhism that is needed in China or across the Asias where Buddhism sits.
So it's almost like you're almost seeing Buddhism as a collection of various.
Right. So the person who proposed that was seeing Buddhism as a practice that humans need to do, and you can change times and places and universes, but a Buddhism would still have to exist that would bring mindfulness or presence or self-awareness to whichever beings were having that journey.
Mm-hmm.
But right, so we want to start with the first school. We want to start with impermanence.
Right. Right. So these are the three big things on central team. Yeah. So these are the three big things to Buddhism: is impermanence, no self, and suffering.
Yes, and these get translated a little bit different. If you go to a Vipassana retreat, they use the word anicca, or the pronunciation anicca, and they sort of translate it as change, which is a stand-in for impermanence. So the word I'm using, impermanence, here.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of everything is changing is sort of how they describe it there. And you sit and you meditate and you notice how your breath changes and everything changes and nothing really stays.
Okay, so let's start with that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to really pound this in so that I get it forever, and I will always have it. What is?
I would like to have my enlightenment moment in the next 5 minutes. Thank you.
No, not full enlightenment, just the impermanence, so that I always have it with me and I never have to not have it. It will be the same forever.
Right.
What is that?
Right.
Also, how could that be? How could you have impermanence as a constant? Wouldn't that make it permanence?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a paradox, but even impermanence comes and goes in waves.
Okay.
If I pick an example of like a rock is more impermanent than a river, because a river will keep moving, but a rock can stay there for quite a while, and eventually it will also move or get moved or be destroyed, but it has a greater level of permanence than other objects. And maybe a tree will keep growing.
You know what this is reminding me of is like when I was younger, I was at this family's house, and they moved a couch that hadn't been moved since like their kid was born. So the kid must have been like 3 or 4 or something. And they moved the couch, and the kid didn't know that the couch could move, and so it started crying.
Wow. Yeah, makes sense. Like particularly psychologically, there are times in our lives where we rely on the permanence of certain phenomena in our environment to stabilize us, to understand ourselves and who we are. So there's the stable object for a little kid is often a blanket, or a particular blanket, or a teddy bear that becomes an object of stability throughout their life. Mm-hmm. And obviously we grow out of that, and we grow into maybe some of our possessions, and then we grow out of that into maybe some of our friends, and then we grow out of that into our ideologies. And this is obviously, I'm pointing at a developmental ladder here. There's a guy named Robert Keegan, and that's his developmental ladder. And then we grow out of our ideologies into like a fluid sense of self and being. But he proposes that you can really screw up a kid by shaking them and their permanent objects. So if a kid is like, has grown out of the objects and into the friendships, and then you move their schools, you can really screw them up you set them back several years, because what they thought was stable is particularly unstable in this moment. Mm-hmm. And so what will happen is people will fall back to the prior stable object and then stay there for a lot longer, maybe jump over one and then have to come back and clean up or something like that. So confusing, traumatizing, psychologically stressful, basically. And this applies for like if you're going to get divorced. There's an age at which, before it matters, like if a kid is 5 and the parents are like, my parents just don't live together anymore, it's fine. And then if a kid is like a late teenager, they're like, sometimes people don't get, but if they're like 10 to 15, or the range is probably a lot smaller than that, but if they're in that spot where they just need stability in that place for the next 2 to 3 years, then it's particularly difficult for them to adjust and understand the world. Probably closer to the like 10 to, anyway. So the proposal is try not to screw up your kid by shaking their permanent structure when they like imagine like your kid has just gotten used to having this is their favorite blanket, they have it around all the time, and then you're like, it's dirty, I'm throwing it out. Like there's a level of upsetness that will be very hard to resolve in that kid, because if you've thrown it out, you can't get it back, and you know that, but they'll be very upset and confused about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's sort of 2 concepts for me that seem to be coming up. There is that idea of permanence and permanence that I mean, like even object permanence. Like I don't think my kid has object permanence yet. Mm-hmm. But then there's like this sort of lack of control where hey, I was using that, or I need that, or I wanted that, and now it's gone, which I think sort of moves into more like dukkha, or the suffering.
Right. So obviously the 3 characteristics are linked to each other. Often impermanence very deeply links to suffering, and very deeply links to no self, and they sort of occur very nearby to each other, to the extent that the book Manual of Insight by Mahasi Sayadaw proposes that it is one characteristic implies the other 2. So impermanence implies that there is no self, because to have a self would propose that something is permanent, which and there being no self implies that there's a suffering there because there's a clinging to a self, and they sort of like bounce off each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So yeah, I guess there's a point where they kind of all coexist in the same space.
right. So they're sort of, they're meant to be three marks of a very similar thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then how does the permanence and permanence work? And well, I guess like what should people be aiming for? Or maybe I don't even like, what would be the first question to ask them? The first question I think I would ask is like, okay, so there are levels of impermanence. Like I know that in my life, there are things that are more likely to be there in the future than not.
Right. So as with many meditative schools, the first thing we do is we meditate on the breath. And there are many other objects to choose, but
yeah, that's lame. Let's pick something more interesting.
Well, no. But you meditate on the breath, and you're paying attention to the breath, and the breath goes in and out, right? So you take a breath in, and then the breath stops, and there's this gap between taking a breath in and taking a breath out, and then you take a breath out, and the breath again, it stops. And so even though you're trying to track the breath as if it were permanent, there are these two standard, like built into the breath, these two moments where the breath isn't really there.
Mm-hmm. So like really like sitting by yourself, breathing, and then noticing when you stop breathing, I guess.
Right. So we build up our attention, we put all of our attention on the breath, and then we like stay concentrated as best we can. And then we're watching the breath, and then we breathe out, and then there's no breath anymore. And often that moment, and because we're trying to pay attention to it, we're trying to make it into a permanent object. We're trying to like follow the breath over a period of time. And so then when there is no breath, when I breathe out, then it's very confusing because I've been trying to spend all this time making it permanent, making it something I can concentrate and pay attention to, and then it's not there, it blinks out. So there's a experience of like noticing there is no breath. And the sort of, we don't fully understand the mechanism of what's going on, but the proposal is that fundamentally, when we try and make the breath the object and make it permanent, and then we notice it being impermanent, we learn something. We learn something from that experience. And it's not like we learn something in the, let me write it out in 3 sentences for you and can explain it like written down knowledge. It's more like we learn something experientially. We learn something about our experience of reality, that things are not permanent, and something as simple as the breath, something that's there all the time, despite the fact that it does seem like we're always breathing, it's not. There is an impermanence to it. And when we learn that at a very deep level and a mental level, we realize just how unstable everything is. And that's like, there's a realization of the fundamental nature of impermanence is how it can be described. So then the breath is an internal object, and it's part of the body, and you can still look at around your room and be like, the walls look pretty permanent to me, right? And that's fine. Yeah, and they do, and they have a level of permanence where, well, 2 things. One is the mind is fairly variable compared to the walls, and the body is very variable compared to the walls. But the walls too, they have an impermanence. They can be chopped into pieces, they can be repainted, they can be changed in such a way that they will be different. And the proposal is that minds do this thing where we lean on, we look for support, and we look to lean on our experience for support, and look for stable and permanent things with which to lean on, with which to understand the universe, or with which to be comfortable.
Yeah.
And so
I definitely do take comfort in knowing how things work or how they are.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels safer, like when I know stuff.
Right. So interestingly, you take comfort in the knowing that you project onto of my surroundings, right?
Yeah.
So comfort is actually in the knowing and not in the surroundings. Even
Yeah.
projected into our surroundings, it is because I know this room that this room makes me feel safe, but actually it is because I have a sense of knowing that the knowing makes me feel safe.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
out of concrete objects.
Sometimes it's the environment. Like sometimes I'll do things and I'm like, okay, now this is safe. And then I'll forget about it, but I'll still have that sense of safety.
Right. So maybe I'm building a bridge over a river, and I will I'm working out how to build a bridge, and I bang it a couple times, and I make that noise, and I'm like, oh, that's a good sound. That sound means that it feels stable. Right. And now that I know that, I can walk all over it, I can whatever. But I had to do this thing in order to convince myself or to get the knowing that it was safe. Now that I have the knowing, I don't have to keep knocking on it to get that. I already have it. And maybe tomorrow I'll come back and check it again because things can change overnight, whatever. But I had to do things to get the knowing that it was stable. And now I have it. And now that bridge is always stable. Or relative, maybe I'll come back in a few days and check again. So there's something to knowing my environment and like building reliability into my environment.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious about like the milestones. So like I think like if I were to be thinking about this, I would think of, that like object permanence almost being the first milestone. Is that like permanence exists.
And that is like I'm no longer surprised. I put a balloon in front of your face and then I make it go away. I move it away and then I bring it back. And then you're like, wow, a balloon again. How interesting. And then I move it away and then I bring it back. And I do this for 3 hours. And eventually you'll be like, this is the same balloon. This is boring.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's like a level of development that happens when you realize that objects exist even, or like I guess they exist in your mind or something. I don't know how I don't know what the experience is like of what would be like for someone who doesn't have object permanence. But I imagine that it's like something like, oh, the object is still there. Like there are still objects that exist. Like I think about objects or I know certain things are there even though they're not in my direct experience.
Maybe it's something like living, like dreaming. So you're in a dream and you're like, I need to finish my math homework. I need a pencil, and suddenly a pencil appears, right? That's I need to and like, oh no, there's no lead in this pencil. I need to sharpen it. Like I'm having this experience where, and then a sharpener, and I need something to sharpen it with. Do I even remember that sharpeners exist? And if I do, then maybe they appear. And if I don't, then I'm like, how do I sharpen pencils? And I have great confusion because there's like a lack of ability to cross the bridge of how to sharpen pencils.
Sure. Or knowing that there's a sharpener in the drawer.
Yeah.
It's already like a thing where it's like, oh, you can't see it, but you know it's there.
Right. So if I'm an organized person and my pencil case always has the right things in it, then I know myself as a person who can reach into the pencil case and get the sharpener because it's always there. And so my dream is not going to have that struggle. It's going to have a different struggle.
That's I think is even more abstract, where it's like it always has a sharpener in there. It's not a sharpener that's in there. Like it's not the same that object is where it is. It's this case has the property of always having or something, or there's this Aristotelian sharpener that exists within the case.
Right. They will. My desk is always stocked with the stationery to solve the problem of how do I complete the task.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw this. There's this YouTube clip of the guy, and he's like, it's a magic table. You put the dishes on it, and you walk away, and when you come back, they're clean. They're in the dishwasher and cleaned. And then his wife is like losing her shit because obviously that. Yeah, so like for him, he's like seeing the table as having those properties, versus like understanding, I guess, the concept, the context or the
cause and effect behind table properties. Yeah, right.
yeah.
My favorite part is, maybe you can find the clip, but part 2 of the clip, maybe I shouldn't spoil it. It's a good clip. It's a good little comedy.
Yeah, yeah. And so like that's like, I guess like even, yeah, so like there would be, so for him there's a permanence to the table or to the laundry, but
Property
for,
of cleaning of the magical table. Yeah.
yeah, and for the wife there's a different permanence in that she's always having to clean up after him.
Mhm.
And then I guess I don't know how to say that, but like it's just, I guess, so like, but those are like different milestones of permanence, right? Because I imagine my kid is going to have a certain point where he's like, oh, food just shows up or something, or
Right.
he cries and then
One day you'll have to teach him that food grows on trees and then get delivered to supermarkets, and then you buy it and then you bring it home, and then it's in the fridge. It doesn't just appear in the fridge.
yeah, well yeah, or the other way of like extending out where food comes from. But yeah, like, so like to me it's like already, yeah, like understanding the supply chain of I guess where food comes from versus you cry and you get food is like there's probably a bunch of steps, even though both these things are almost permanent, right? Like I believe that the food supply is even with COVID is more or less permanent for, at least my lifetime, and it changes and stuff, but like I have faith that it will always be there.
So something I find fascinating going into COVID supply chain things. Most of our food, like if you think of fresh food, it's got a shelf life of 3 weeks ish, probably less.
Shelf
life, like so there's objects in packets that are dried and preserved.
Yeah, there's like different tiers. Like if it's in the fridge, it's got like a week.
Right. So if it's a fresh fruit or vegetable, it's got maximum 3 weeks from sort of when it's picked to eaten or it's rotten.
Yeah, depends, but yeah.
Yeah, and there are like longer term foods, but like the healthier foods seem to be the ones with the short lifespans anyway, which means that, and we've got the 6 billion people on the planet, or maybe more, which means that we have been keeping enough food available for 6 billion people within a 3-week window. Like,
yeah,
for such
it's shorter than that. Yeah,
right,
because they have to get it to us while it's like good.
Pick it fresh, get it
like a day or two even.
Right.
Yeah, and flowers are crazy as well. Like that supply chain for getting flowers
like 3 days, 5 days.
I think it's that, but only because they have really good supply chains. Because like they pump the trunk with nitrogen and like they do all this stuff. But like if you think about like fresh cut flowers just die really quickly. But they've managed to do this thing where like the Dutch can grow flowers and then you can give it to your wife like just fresh flowers whenever you want to buy fresh flowers, which is like actually insane to me.
Right.
But so yeah, like I think there's
tolerance so tiny. Like we have a few weeks to and for the fresh food, we have a few weeks to get it to eat it, or it's gone rotten.
Yeah. You keep saying a few weeks. That's not my experience exactly.
Yeah,
it's like
how many people like, use the fridge depends on the temperature. 2 weeks.
Yeah, like fruits will last longer, but like veg doesn't last. Like if it's in the fridge, it's like you gotta eat it by the end of the week.
Right.
Unless you're like playing around with like doing something smart.
Cook things last an extra couple of days, like all the rest.
Yeah, and like celery, we do this thing sometimes. We put it in water, and then it will last like almost indefinitely because it'll just keep going.
But so us as a society have been keeping a 2 weeks window of food supply for all of the people on the planet for thousands of years. And I guess if we didn't, people died, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of places in history where they did, where they
And
had like dried,
dried
like
food.
stuff like the grains would last, you would dry it out, and those would
Mhm.
last.
Yep.
Like livestock.
But
Uh,
we have done exceptionally well
but
as a
yeah,
society. We're doing
yeah.
great, actually.
And
So,
I think we can also talk about the permanence of the supply chain. Like I think that will have the supply chain is permanent, but you can do things to mess it up, right?
hmm.
Like Venezuela is very good at messing up their supply chain. And like I think there's like a sort of like you need like like I guess a nuance of the permeability of the permanent ability is the permeability the permanent ability, I don't know if that's a word, of the supply chain, right? Because you can do things to mess it up, like COVID did do, like there are certain, like the supply chain did get um
Well,
damaged or whatever.
most recent one here is that a good fraction of truck drivers have had COVID at the same time and then couldn't deliver things to supermarkets. And so like, oh, we're stuck. We had like
Yeah,
a week or two of like, oh, it's tricky. Looks like there's not much food in the supermarkets, but no one starved as far as I know.
yeah, and even with us, like there was like the toilet paper shortage, and there was a bunch of other things
We
that
had
too.
early on in the pandemic.
Yeah, there's still a little bit now. Like I can't always get eggs, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, eggs and milk. But there's a whole Canadian government conspiracy thing happening with that. So I shouldn't say conspiracy. Regulations that create like it's like they just do things that don't really make sense.
Is
But
it
they
like
make sense
eggs
for
need to be at the supermarket within a certain time frame or they can't sell them more?
no, it's like it's overly regulated. So you need like specific licenses, and they're only allowed to produce so much. So our eggs and milk wind up being more expensive and
Right.
like more easily hit by these things.
Okay.
Instead
Fair
of
enough.
just sort of letting, I mean, if you want to do some milk, do some milk. Like here's the rules on what you're allowed to sell.
Hmm. Right.
Uh,
So there's a impermanence on a more global scale, and that's very interesting, but it gets a little intellectual. It's no longer
yeah, that was a little abstract. Maybe we should
well,
put some.
it's still interesting, and it's importantly, I would say, the same impermanence happens up there as happens, from a meditative perspective. We often want to observe. We want to be looking at what we can naturally observe ourselves and directly see. So the breath is really convenient because it's always going in and out and it's always there. And
Okay,
we really want to be
you're
like,
starting to sell me on this paying attention to my breath thing.
we want to be looking at the first person, seeing for myself the nature of my own impermanence and my own experience of impermanence, rather than the intellectual argument of supply chains or food or all these other cool, fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, so doing the breath, there's a permanence of like I'm going to keep breathing, I guess, until I don't have the capacity to notice, I guess.
Right, and there's a cool thing that if you sort of if you watch the breath, so talking about breath things now, usually when we start watching the breath, we watch on top of the breath, like we try and sit our experience on top and watch really carefully what the breath is doing, right? What you can do is, instead of being on top, you can sit sort of after the breath and like not really sure what it's about to do and just follow it up and down.
Okay, so let me see if I got this right. It's on top of it is like, I guess before you're breathing, you're doing the anticipation of what's going to happen, or
Right.
you're like making it happen.
It's sort of like the mind.
Micromanaging your breathing.
Yeah. There's a lot of the mind can micromanage the breathing. But if you can choose to sort of sit back and watch the breathing happen, then, and it's tricky because you watch one breath and then you're like, okay, don't breathe, right? Don't micromanage my breath. Don't take another breath. And then it gets uncomfortable. And so you have to breathe. And then and you're no longer watching, you're suddenly you're active. So it takes a little bit of getting used to sitting behind the breath and watching it happen and do its thing. But eventually what happens is you take a deep breath in, you breathe out, and then you don't not breathe and you don't breathe. And then the breathing just happens without you because your body obviously knows how to breathe. And there's this usually a very peaceful and beautiful breath when you do that.
Okay, that sounds really nice. So it's like, so if you, when you first start your, it's like, yeah, okay, so there's this thing of like, if when you don't notice a thing until someone points it out, and so there's something like of notice your breathing, and now you have to do it manually.
Yes, breathing on manual.
Yeah,
feeling the inside of your mouth, blah blah blah.
Yeah, so like I got you there. And then this would be like, okay, so I'm noticing that I'm breathing, so now I have to do it manually. But then instead of doing it manually, I'm, I guess, waiting for it to do it by itself.
And trying to like give it space to do it itself.
Yeah, so not interfering, you're noticing your breathing, but you're also not taking control of the breathing. So it's almost like a separation of I guess like noticing and choosing or action or something.
Right. And I can deliberately breathe, right? I can go and I can actively make a breath happen. And so we want to do none of that, as little of that as possible, and let the breath do its thing without actively breathing.
Yeah. Let the breath do its thing without actively breathing. But also still noticing it, because like I can do it, let it do its thing, and then I'm getting into the conversation with you, and my breathing is just doing whatever it's doing.
Right.
This is
staying on it. So a mindfulness of breath while letting it do its thing. And obviously it takes a little bit of time to learn to meditate, because we have all these bad habits of like, well, if I'm noticing it, then I better start controlling it. So there's a bit of time to be like, oh, I accidentally started controlling, better, gently let it go and try and watch it properly this time.
Yeah, that's a big thing I've noticed in meditation, is noticing things without having to get involved.
Right, without sort of grasping and clinging onto them really tightly.
Yeah, I think that's going to come in useful with parenting. Yeah. So I can notice that I'm breathing without reacting or without feeling like I need to do it. I can let it happen and observe it. Right.
And this is particularly interesting because our breath does, it influences our mind, and we may accidentally find like, if you get on a roller coaster and you watch your breath, it's probably, you're going to breathe really quickly. You're going to be excited. You're going to be like, right. And so there's sort of the breath carries the transition, the emotional transition, and the mental, like you'll be thinking like, oh, scary. And then you'll be like breathing really quickly, because the breath sort of does
like a fear response or whatever. It's like,
so the breath sort of transitions between these parts of your system who are juggling experience.
Right. Okay, so that's interesting. So wait, you're saying something about how breath acts as like a way of internal regulation or communication or something?
Right. And of course, if someone is anxious and having a panic attack, and you can get them to breathe into a bag, the classic breathe into a paper bag.
Yeah. Well, that's there to prevent the hyperventilating.
Right.
So hyperventilating is when you're breathing too much, your body gets saturated with oxygen and it's not able to expel the CO2. And you get
feedback loop
and pass out. Yeah. So the paper bag is there. It helps regulate it because you can't breathe too much because the paper bag restricts you. And then also what you're breathing is already reused oxygen. So you get, so there's more CO2 there and less oxygen.
Yep. And so we can sort of this phenomena, we can approach it from the physiological perspective and help slow it down through the physiological, and then the racing thoughts will calm down as well when we breathe into the back.
Right. Because what you're saying, so you're saying there's a physiological thing, where if you're noticing your breath and you're breathing calmly, you're going to not hyperventilate, which I think is obviously correct.
Yep.
And but then there's also another thing of like, it's not just like the hyperventilating and then your respiratory system's effect on your body, but it's also something about the different parts of the mind or the brain or the body interacting with each other through the breath.
Well, so I want to make that dangerous claim that these systems are kind of connected.
Okay.
And
I think this is probably true, right? Like if you get like anxiety or fear or whatever, like there is like this is like a psychological thing a psychology thing where you focus on your breathing and you calm down, you breathe calmly, and that helps keep you calm, and it helps like regulate you.
Right. So there's a way in which this is trivially true, that, well, obviously you're in the same body as your breathing and your heart rate and your racing thoughts. You're all sort of together. You're in one person there. But there's a way in which it is not just trivially true, but like deeply true that these things are connected. That and some people are in the everyone's sort of trivially true, unless you have a belief like souls or our experience is a bit like the Matrix or one of those things. And so the mind is not with the body. Chances are you're in the like trivially true, the mind is with the body, experience is all kind of, but to propose that they are deeply true, like deeply connected, some people are maybe not so sure of that yet. Like classic one is I'm going to use the cautious phrase of facts don't care about your feelings. And so there's a proposal that there's a separation between fact and feeling, where there's a problem because to experience a fact and in order to experience a feeling, you have to be the one experiencing it. And so it's linked through your experience.
Yeah.
And so, yes, facts don't care about your feelings, but feelings definitely care about facts.
Yeah.
You should always be aware of the two-way street that you're playing on.
Yeah. And also feelings are facts as well. In the sense that if you're feeling something, it's a fact that you're feeling it.
Yeah.
Not that thing that's in your head while you're feeling it is true.
Yeah. And there's some cautionary stuff here, because there would be like they're subjective facts and you should occasionally verify and check them, and like you can overreact. Like just because your feeling says I don't like them doesn't mean it's their problem. It could in fact be something in you. They could remind you of someone else. Like, but the fact
but you are having that experience, and it's important to acknowledge it. But that experience doesn't make it true.
Make it the truth. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Make it a different truth. Yeah.
Right. And if we bring impermanence back in for a moment, the fact that you're angry at someone now doesn't have to be a permanent conclusion about the state of their character or something.
Right. You could be angry at someone and you can have a lot of negative thoughts about them, and then you could also acknowledge that later you might not have that experience.
Right. Maybe I was just grumpy hungry, and now I feel way better, and now I'm fine. It is the people who have had more practice having different feelings and having the changing of feelings that are more skilled at working through them and having them and working with them, recognizing that impermanence of feeling.
Yeah.
Right. So impermanence.
Yeah. So I just want to say, I think this conversation is good, the way we keep like drifting in and out, because it shows that even though we're talking about impermanence, it's not necessarily a permanent part of our conversation. So we're embodying the idea as we discuss it.
Right. So I was going to go for like states. So this is this idea that you are in a state of being right now. So you are experiencing things that may contribute to your state, include your surroundings, include your mood, include your thoughts. Like lots of things contribute to your general sense of how things are right now. right?
Yeah.
And your state is something that will change moment by moment, minute by minute. You will have an ongoing changing state, and your state can often influence your behavior. If you're in a good mood, you're going to treat people differently than if you're in a bad mood.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And states are impermanent. States are, we do want to feel good. We want to feel like good, happy, positive, enjoying ourselves all the time. And yet, when we cling to states, we end up in this more negative state because we are trying to hold on and grip to it.
Yeah, this is a thing. Like this, I used to do this all the time when I was a kid. I'm like angry and I'm trying to stay angry. And because otherwise the anger means nothing, right? I'm angry, you did this thing, you really hurt me, and then now I'm not angry, so I don't care anymore. It's like there's like something about it that's very not like very dismissive of my own feelings. Like what you did really hurt me, and now, like, especially as a kid, like, and the ADD and stuff, it's like just trying to like keep a semblance of permanence, of like, I'm angry and then we need to talk about this and sort it out or whatever, or revenge or whatever it is, right? Even as an adult, like sometimes people do things and that invokes a state inside me, and then there's some truths in that state, and then when I'm switching states, because like now I'm not going to stay in that state permanently, it's like you lose some of those truths because you're in a different state, and different things make different senses depending on where you're at.
Right. So if we're talking about impermanence, we can start looking at our states and see them change over time, and see just how massively they change over time. Like the state that I wake up in day by day, and this one is sort of one that takes years to sort of watch, and it's like a little hobby project. Every time I wake up, I'm like, what state am I in today? And just watching that state as it changes, and that state often does a lot. Like it influences my next hour, which may influence my next day. Like sometimes I wake up and I'm like, it feels like I haven't slept enough. And so that may influence the rest of my day. Like that state.
Yeah, like waking up on the wrong side of the bed or right side of the bed.
Right.
Yeah, that sort of can start a cascade effect throughout the day. Even if you're not tired or whatever, you got enough sleep, but just like that moment that you started the thing can start a chain reaction throughout the day.
So if we want to go meditative here, our states are changing moment by moment. Now is different to a minute ago when I started talking about states. Even now is different to a moment ago when I said now.
Yeah, the states are ever changing. But that is a state, right? Like there's an ever-standing change. Like as we're talking about, like with the vibes and like the thing, like it's like a song, right? Like it's like each moment of the song is different, but it's all one song.
Right. Yes, and it's important to notice the impermanence, and what it feels like to me is that in this metaphor, the music is sort of ephemeral. It's not something I can grasp onto and really fully understand, but the moments have a temporary, like I have an experience in this moment. I perceive something. I perceive my state. I'm looking at you. I'm like, in each moment things happen, and yet each thing that happens changes to something else. There's an impermanence to it in a way that is the grand thread of all reality, the great mystical musical shape of all reality that I can't ever really fully know because it keeps changing.
Yeah, so even there, it's like the different levels of impermanence of like this state or this mood that we're in will probably last us mostly to the end of the episode. but also even within that, it's always changing. So something happened in the beginning, like I've been up and down more like throughout this situation, and not being stuck in those up and not being stuck in the up or not being stuck in the down, but being in that place of change.
Mhm.
Of
There's an
hey,
extra.
that was a really good note, but I'm already on the next one.
So there's a component here of there are things that we like, there are states that we prefer to other states, and that's one piece of information. And the other piece of information is we can cultivate, we can move towards certain states, and with practice, obviously, it gets easier to move towards the states that we prefer, move out of the states that we don't prefer. It takes a little bit of
And that's within the framework of impermanence, in that you're not getting caught up in what's happening now. Sorry, you're not getting, this is weird actually. You're not getting caught up in what's happening now, because you're living in this place of impermanence where whatever's happening, other things will happen as well. And so you're looking at those things across time. Which is interesting, because it's almost like the opposite of what I think the straw man, or like what like the stereotype of the Buddhist thing is, where the stereotype of Buddhist is always live in the present moment, always be here now. And you're saying, well, now is impermanent, so don't be here, be with the impermanence, be with the change.
Impermanence is a tricky one as well, because time keeps time keeps moving forwards. There will always be change, unless we can, and we don't think we currently can change the arrow of time. So here we are.
Maybe it just stops sometimes, and we just don't notice, right?
Right.
If everything just the universe just stopped for 1,000 years and then it continued, it would look the same to us.
Right.
So whether or not it is or isn't, I think.
Right. And so we have the difficulty that we exist in a particular arrow of time.
Sure.
And so we kind of just got to go with it as it is.
Yeah.
It keeps changing.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, okay. So I like that. So it's like, don't get stuck up on too much what's happening now. Notice that in Jewish, we have King Solomon asked for a ring to be made that would make him laugh when he was crying and cry when he was laughing.
Ooh, interesting.
And so they inscripted on the ring Gam Ze Ya'avor, which means this too shall pass.
Ah, yes.
Which I wanted to get on my wedding ring, and my wife wouldn't let me.
Yeah, I can see how your wife would.
Yeah, see, I wanted to do it because I do think that impermanence that you're talking about is important, because the song of marriage is a song that lasts a long time. And if you're getting caught up in the garbage fights, or the fights over the garbages, then you're gonna have a bad time. And so to always remember that everything that's happening, it will pass, is I think very important.
And I would say the same for if you get caught up in the excitement and you keep wanting the excitement.
Yeah, you get addicted to that. Oh, I felt a certain way, and I just want to recreate that same feeling over and over again. I think it doesn't. It like forces it into this space. It forces a relationship to the space that is not where it should be. Like, that's not how.
You'd say there isn't room for growth in that little repetition.
Yeah, and the growth becomes repulsive. And change becomes repulsive. So even if things are getting better, you're gonna fight that the whole time, because you're just looking for like some experience you had when you were 20 that you were misremembering, probably even.
Right. Remember the good old days. So right, there's something important here of separating past, present, and future. And this is important for our cognitive process. We often flicker around, right? We jump into a memory of the past. We like jump into the it'll be better tomorrow, and then we stop here for a brief moment, and then we sort of jump around. But we do confusing things where I'm having an argument with my partner, and I say, you always do this, right? I come out of the past, and I make permanent the past, and I say there is a permanent pattern here that I'm stuck with.
Yeah, and even that, like, you always do it, as always, it's like it almost like transcends time, where it's in the past, it's in the present, and it's in the future,
right?
And then you're creating this, you wind up creating this, like, I guess, permanent monument. Not that I
always do this and I don't like it, right?
Yeah.
Right. But I've done this thing where I've confused the past, the present, and the future. We've done this many times before, and I'm frustrated at you now.
Yeah.
Because, there's a clear distinction there, and the person can be like, the person could say, you have no right to be frustrated, blah 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 blah. Well, that's an interesting.
Well, then they have to deal with this thing, like that is the thing, is like, you create this thing, so you create this misery for yourself, and then the other person has to, like, live in this world where this is the kind of person they are, as they always do this thing,
right?
And maybe they don't want to always do that thing, but you've created this language and this, like, story and around yourself and each other, that, like, now every time the other person looks at you, they're going to remember that this is the kind of person that they are, and then they're going to feel shitty about themselves.
So we talked about this. It was around episode 3, where we talked about violence, and we went physical violence, and then emotional violence, and then causal violence. So physical violence, I can punch you. Emotional violence, I can just be angry, and Daniel, I'm so angry at you. And then causal violence, I can be like, Daniel, I remember I said, Daniel, you wear glasses. People who wear glasses are bad. And so I can impart the idea that you are bad and wrong because of a fundamental nature of your being. You always, it's a causal violence, that to propose that you always are harmful to me, or you're always a mean person to me.
Right. I like this thing we're talking about. It's because you're shifting it from this thing that's, like, permanent, of you always do this, into a like once you notice the pattern of impermanence, then it's no longer that you always do this as a permanent fixture of our song. There's this pattern that keeps reoccurring in our song that bothers me.
Right. And it's okay to notice a pattern and ask for a pattern to be different.
Right.
And hopefully everyone who is involved in the pattern, once it's pointed out, can start to notice it and start to be present to it and start to act differently.
Right. And I think that reframes the whole situation, right? Because you've decreased the stakes a lot, where it's, instead of, like, saying, hey, we're playing together and you're always doing this and this and that, like band fight, we're going to break up. It's we're playing this music together, and I'm noticing this pattern inside the music that I don't like, and then the implication of that is, let's play the music in a way where we don't have this pattern, or figure out ways to, like, and then that's a much safer way of doing things.
Right. It's also a request, not a demand. Like, you always do this. It's sort of like, I demand that you stop. Whereas
right.
I can see this pattern. Can we do,
like, hard stop? It's this thing where and then you wind up being people that are working together to do something, and that's very bonding.
Right. And we've started to bring a new element into this conversation just here. We've started to bring in the future. Can you do that? Let's work together. And
right. And that just applies by, like, the pattern, right? Like, why are you bringing this up unless you want that, you want that pattern to change?
Right. And so we've got the past, we've got the present, we've got the future, we've got the you always do this. We're bringing the past. We've got the in the future, I would like it to be different. Like, but there's what I would call something like a sorting, where I can sort my experience, and the mistake that is made in you always do this is that I haven't properly sorted my experience, and I've concluded that the thing that happened in the past and has now happened in the present is going to happen in the future as well. And that may not necessarily be the case but that's the way I've sorted it. And so my internal impermanence of always do this is causing me, I'm now frustrated and I don't like the look of the future. And so as I start to sort the way that I'm using language and the way that I'm perceiving the world, I realize that it happened in the past, I don't like it now, and I can freely ask for something to be different in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no confusion here anymore.
Yeah, I think it actually, I think it actually opens up even more, because if you're just talking about the pattern, right? Like it is, I think it is uncomfortable often, especially if you're playing the wrong note in a band and people are like, hey, there's this thing where the wrong note gets like, there's this pattern here, then you're gonna like not necessarily feel good about yourself. But yes, like, but I do think it's a much more generative, co-creative experience to
the thing that I like to do here also is to bring the nature of consciousness into this experience. So it is true that people get frustrated at each other. It is, and it's not personal, it's not about you and me. It is that we've caught ourselves in the frustration pattern where I did a thing and you get frustrated at me. Oh no, now we have to work out how to leave this pattern and have a better way.
Yeah, like how do we fix this? And
together, hopefully together. And
like I don't know how to change, right? Is a big one.
But for me, it's on both sides, that it's no longer I did the wrong thing, therefore I'm bad, and you're the frustrated one, therefore blah blah blah. It's actually, there's this consciousness pattern where one person does a thing and the other person gets frustrated, and now we're in this together, choosing to do it, find a new way through it, which is much more together than adversarial. The
thing I want to add as well to this is there is something about like when you're in these spaces and you're like, okay, well, fine, I want to not do it, but I don't know how. And I think the impermanence has, like, realizing that it's not permanent, that you're always changing every moment, or sorry, things are always changing every moment. And then I'm like cheating, going ahead into no self a little bit, but like realizing that means that you don't have to know how to do it, right? Because everything is already impermanence. Each moment already is new, and each pattern is new, and it's not the same. And so it gives you like a little bit of extra space to work within, where it's not this monolith that exists across time. It's different notes, and the patterns are real. Like, I'm not saying patterns aren't real, but they're patterns, and you live through those patterns.
Right. So impermanence, right? And there's a this is going to start bridging into the second school, which is maybe like, this is a good sweet spot to wrap up, give a hint and wrap up. The good thing about impermanence is that the things I don't like end, which is I was in the sun and it was very hot, and then I went indoors and I went, like, that was nice to get out of the sun. And so the thing that I was not liking ended. And that's like a good thing about impermanence. The bad thing, or the struggle of impermanence, is the things I like will also end. Like, I'm gonna have to go walk outside at some point and have the sun hot again. And so enjoying the cold will also end. It's also, if I stay in the cold for too long, I will also dislike it. Like, there's something of a preference for impermanence at times, that also the things I like will end.
Right.
And, what I found when
this episode will end eventually.
Yeah. So what I found when I was starting in sort of Theravada territory or impermanence territory, and to be clear, this is a simplification of the journey. The journey runs all over the place.
Yeah, we're just talking about it for a little bit. It's not.
But there's so I didn't have like a clear line through impermanence to suffering to no self. I sort of had like a bit of a dance all over the place, but with a thread through the middle. So on realizing the impermanence of everything, there's something of a drawing back from the world, where maybe I would have liked nice food, but then I went, nice food is impermanent. Like, why should I go crave after nice food when nice food is impermanent? And so there's a drawing away, and then there's a like, what followed for me was some particularly interesting types of suffering, particularly in so maybe then the next time I get hungry, instead of feeding the hunger and like feeling better, eating food, I would have gone, but everything's impermanent. Even if I eat, I'll be hungry again later. And so there's this confusing frustration that there's a suffering that the fact is I still will get hungry. There's a type of suffering that will come back, and that really sucks. And so there's this experience. I actually have big theories about the dark nights of the soul, but I would propose one type of dark night of the soul is a recognition of suffering. That when everything was impermanent,
that's jumping ahead a bit, but yeah.
Suddenly there was all this suffering that became more frequent in my life for a period of time, a couple of months, I'd say.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. 2 episodes.
But that's so impermanence, particularly the impermanence of the good things, without and there's something called skillful means, and later there's an operation of impermanence skillfully. So what I want is the shitty things end, and the good things are fulfilling enough to make me feel good. So they're permanent, that I can enjoy them. Someone can actually give me a hug and I can feel it, and I can be like, oh, this is a really nice hug. And I can enjoy it enough to feel fulfilled and permanent with it. And then the loneliness that I felt prior was impermanent, and like skillfully operate impermanence. So loneliness dropped away, and the hug was actually fulfilling enough to have me feel. Whereas the wrong way to feel it would be that the loneliness is really permanent and there all the time, and even though I'm getting a hug in a moment, I'll also feel lonely again. Like, the wrong way.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's a big thing, I think, with impermanence is if when you start to cling on to things as permanent, you lose capacity for anything else. Or like it takes.
I think I see this as like an organizing of the mind. So putting the past, present, and future in their respective places, putting the impermanence in and the permanence into their respective places as well, so that I can enjoy things that are permanent enough, and that things that are uncomfortable enough can dissolve away.
Yeah.
So some sort of that's part of impermanence is the skillful operation of impermanence.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the big things I really like as the rationalist. It like when I'm experiencing I guess existence or whatever as impermanent, I'm more willing to let go of things, which means like my processing power improves. Because there's more of my mind that I'm able to, right? Because if I'm having to remember like 7 things, like all these things are really important, I have to always do them, then there's very little room for.
We know our memory is 7 ± 2.
Right. So let's say I have 3 things, right? Now all of a sudden that's half my memory is taken up. I can't really be here. Like I can't fully be here. I can't fully calculate it out. I can't think about it. I can't relax even, because if I relax, I'm going to forget what you're saying, because I don't have that, what's it called? The temporary, like the temporary memory that you use, like the RAM, essentially.
You don't have short-term retrieval.
Short-term memory, yeah. My short-term memory is not there because there's all these things filled up. I don't know if I could come up with the word. Yeah. And so being able to let go and acknowledge and and live as if things are impermanent. It's much more flexible.
Right. And so there's something very interesting there in terms of trusting that the important things will come back. And this is obviously debatable because sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I think that's a longer discussion, and there's a skillful way of doing that. Because if you're like a tiger trainer, you don't want to necessarily forget there's a tiger around. But yeah. Yeah, like at least for this, like there's and I think like understanding the permanence as well, like you were saying, where it's not just nothing is permanent and that's all the same, and like a very like washing everything with that, even though I think everything is impermanent. But there are the levels, like what does that mean to be impermanent? Noticing that the walls are more permanent than your breath. Or like your breath, because your breath stops, but that your breathing might be more permanent or less permanent than the walls, depending on your age and
your time scale. Right, you may move house, and then the walls become different walls.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, impermanence is that's interesting, because before this conversation I kind of thought of it as like a uniform thing. Just there's this like one insight that you have to understand everything is impermanent, and then that's it. And now having this conversation, it's actually, this is way more nuanced than I give it credit for.
So impressively for Buddhism, it does seem like pointing back to this one concept. Like we've covered it from many different angles, but it does seem to be like all roads point back to this impermanence thing in many ways. And interestingly, that isn't present, as far as I know, in Christianity or Judaism. It's maybe present in like the Taoism, but like the Confucius sort of philosophies. But I don't see it. And the
Judaism does do a lot of time things, like how long do things last?
But the nature of permanence or impermanence isn't explored in those, which is I wonder two sides. One is, what does
the whole world in Judaism, the whole world is impermanent. Like it's only the Messiah is going to come in another whatever, less than 1,000 years, and then we'll all be with God again. So like I guess like the nature of our existence now is impermanent in that way. Like the nature of the world is impermanent. They do a lot of like, you're going to die, and then your good deeds and your negative deeds are going to be added up, and there's a reckoning at the end of the day.
I think I see like Catholicism doing the original sin, repent today. Buddhism also doing the don't leave things late to, like do it sooner rather than later, because there isn't much time, and any day is a good day to get enlightened, sort of.
Right.
Right,
and Judaism does have like things over time. I don't know that maybe they do have this like very specific thing of permanence and permanence that I just haven't been exposed to. Nothing's really coming to mind. Like with the Buddhists, like I would imagine that all like Buddhists have at least heard of this. Like all people that have been living as Buddhists for long periods of time would have at least have some familiarity with this.
I think that Daniel Ingram really spoke strongly about these three characteristics, but part of the reason he did that is that sometimes people have been meditated for a long time and have never even picked this as the object to investigate on the inside. And that's why he wanted to amplify the signal of go for the three characteristics and look deeply at them. And I'm on board with that. And I think I understood, I've learned many things from them, from sitting on, noticing what is impermanence, what do we mean by impermanence, meditating on it, noticing, like I described with the breath, or how much everything comes and goes is remarkable.
Yeah.
And that everything comes and goes makes it easy not to be clinging too hard or suffering too hard about the discomforts.
Yeah, because I do think a lot of people have like FOMO. And
so I did
knowing that there's going to be a next thing.
I did a Vipassana retreat about a year ago now, and there was a guy on that retreat who he was about 50 and he looked 80. He looked like he had worn out his body. He would drink it. He said he was like drinking, smoking a pack a week, drinking like a 6-pack a night, like heavy. He looked like a tradie, and he said he was a lawyer, but clearly a like sort of, I guess, worker class lawyer, like dealing with those problems rather. Anyway, and he came on and he said he actually sat against the wall because he said he was in a lot. You don't talk to anyone for 10 days and then you review after. He said he was in so much pain that he couldn't sit there. And the interesting thing about Vipassana, this happens a lot, that people sit there, and Vipassana has something called a sitting of strong determination, where they say, sit and don't move. And if you see pain, investigate it, like cut it in half and like try and find a little bit. And if you can successfully do this, if you investigate, you cut any sensation in half until such time as like you're down to the base molecule of discomfort, and then it like vanishes because of impermanence. And you have this profound realization that all of the pain and discomfort is just impermanent, and like you can handle it, which is incredible. And he said, and he left that 10 days not drinking or smoking, saying best rehab ever. It's hell. It's very hard, but I haven't talked to him since, so I hope he managed to stick off it, because of course people leave these amazing experiences and they go back into their same everyday life, and chances are the old habits are right there. So whether or not it stayed, the realization stuck with him is a good question, but he went from excruciating pain, like couldn't sit upright, to like not even needing to drink or smoke, like lost his addiction sort of impressiveness because
I'm just doing the skeptical thing of like, did that stick? But
I don't know, and I wish I had grabbed his number or something to ask him.
But still, I think even having those experiences, like it like at least gives him that like possibility that it's possible, like that.
Yeah, even if it didn't stick this time, maybe it'll stick another time, or
like that felt sense that, oh, actually this thing it is possible to get past, whether or not it only takes 10 days or for him, or whether it takes longer. But
I would be almost certain that he would be drinking less and smoking less. He may not have stopped entirely, but that's like a huge stepping stone on the path to improvement.
Yeah, because you have to, this is the thing, like you have to believe that it can be done, and it has to be a real belief, not I'm just gonna like pretend that it is. And so even this experience, like he believes it now. Until I guess the next thing shows up.
Fascinating. That was impermanence,
Yeah.
And there were plenty of people I talked to on the last day. You talk to everyone and get to know, and plenty of people were in pain and then watched it disappear in various ways. And I've heard that a few times.
Yeah, there's something about sitting and like noticing the pain that's that does help.
And to refer back to, I think, episode 4, where we talked a lot about metaphysical diseases, it does seem like there's a lot of stuff that can happen in our bodies, like big pains that are trying to tell us something that we can just ignore for a very long time and have it get worse and worse and worse. And then sit with it can be to get to know it and to change the story.
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking, because I do get this pain, like the way I sit sometimes, where I sit on my, I think it's my coccyx. I sit here, I'm not sure. But there it's like, it's like, it's not exactly pain. It's like, there's a little bit of pain, but it's more like, this is a bad idea. It's like a bad feeling. And then I'll adjust, because if I sit on it too long, then I'll actually be in pain afterwards.
Right.
And so yeah, I think I did probably sit with that for a while and notice those cycles, and then noticing, hey, like there is a better way to like don't don't put all this don't put a lot of pressure on these small bones.
Right. Don't get all the way to the pain. You can notice that there's a little warning and then catch it early.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah. And that's the thing, is like you have to have a certain level of impermanence, because if you're thinking, oh, I'm comfortable, like you notice if you're comfortable and then you just sort of stay with that until you're in pain, then you're not going to notice the subtle variations in that journey.
Right. And here's one that probably everyone's done. You're like, I don't really need to pee. And this one's a little bit complicated because our bodies have a couple chemicals that keep us the diuretic hormones that if you're lying down, you need to pee less often and then you stand up and you're like,
yeah,
oh, I really need to.
Oh, all of a sudden I have to pee like so badly. Yeah.
Right. But there's a couple chemicals there that help us there. But you're sitting down, you're like, oh, I need to pee a little bit and it's fine. And then eventually you go to stand up and you're like, oh, I really need to pee. Like, oh, I got to rush to the bathroom real quick. Like kind of a surprise.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting also for the drugs as well, is that like being able to like notice the changes means that when I'm like smoking pot, I'm doing lower doses, I'm doing lower volume, let's say, overall, because I'm noticing what my experience is as I'm having it. And a lot of that is like getting through that guilt. So like there's a lot of times it's like guilt or shame, like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. And then that blocks me from being able to actually experience the thing I'm doing. So like letting go of that and noticing that I'm not sober, but then I take a hit and it's like there's like a little bit, like it doesn't kick in right away, but there is something there. And then like noticing those cycles means that I'm dosing it to the dose that I want, which is almost always lower. Like it's over time, at least it's lower, because I'm actually like enjoying the experience and actually experiencing the experience, and then you just don't need as much. And then also I do it less, because as soon as I start getting the tolerance, I'm noticing that I'm not getting the thing I want from it. And so I'm like instead of trying to force these changes and like these meta patterns of smoke and then feel relaxed, feel good about myself, I'm noticing, oh, well, I'm doing the thing, it's not working. What is it that I'm really after? And then for me, that's the thing, is what is the thing I really want? And the thing I really want is to relax, or to have a good idea, or to spend time with myself, or something, something else sort of starts to come in. And then I can start to meet that need and feel it met. It only works if I'm willing to like let go and move with what's happening, which is scary, for sure. Cool. I think it's a good
time to wrap.
Good place to mark the impermanence.
Live.